Perfect. So Caleb is a public company CEO and a security professional, presently the president and CEO of Synergistic, as trusted partner in healthcare for security, privacy, and compliance. Prior to joining or leading Synergistic, Caleb led the IBM X-Force Threat Intelligence Organization in 2016. He built the X-Force Command, part of a $200 million investment in global incident response services, updated watch floors, and the industry's first immersive cyber range and incident command system for responding to major cyber incidents. And then in 2018, he couldn't leave well enough. Alone. He invented the Cyber Tactical Operations Center, which was first of its kind training, simulation, and security operations center on wheels, which I think is in Europe now at this point, still driving.
Yeah, it's
around.
in a parking lot in Europe due to COVID, but it did come out and visit RIT, which is the important part.
We had a lot of people go through that, and that was awesome. Broad background, having led technical teams, product development, product management, strategy, marketing, cloud service delivery. I'm going to jump in here really quickly. I met Caleb years ago when he was the VP of mobile security at IBM. He went on then go to threat intelligence VP at IBM and is a double RIT major. Is that correct? Or is it a
I didn't have enough, so I came back for another round. What can I tell you?
All right, go Tigers. So I appreciate you being our leadoff alumni speaker for this series. I was just telling Chris we're doing the all-male version this time, and next time it's the all-female version.
Well, I want to note I'm the diversity candidate this time because I'm the one that doesn't have a name Chris.
Oh, that's true. Well, the whole bottom row of my list here, if you will. Yeah, no, this is good. I'm glad you could be here tonight. I know you are crazy busy. I see you on YouTube every week, popping out new videos. And I've seen your stuff with healthcare incidents, obviously, FBI reporting the threats of last week. So I just know that you're just crazy busy. So this time that we have tonight with you is awesome, and I appreciate your giving.
Well, I mean, hey, where do you guys want to start? I could answer some questions. I could talk to you about what's going down in healthcare right now, which this week is pretty interesting. Or I could talk a little bit about, what the whole pandemic means to security. I mean, what is of interest to all of you?
So we're using chat for some of the questions, but since we're down to it looks like 12, 20, 18 people, I'm open to, if you want to light up your video and jump in with a question, I'm okay with that. I know we were using chat with Chris. It's a little bit more informal at this point. And I know we've lost some people along the way, but yeah, I mean, if you want to jump in with the questions, and I know we already wrote questions for you in the class. It was kind of part of our prep work.
Okay.
So I'm going to step back. I might actually jump off for a second and come back and let you guys just take it from here.
All right.
Okay.
All right. So I got the chat open. I don't see anything in it. So somebody asked me a question.
Yeah, it's just sitting there still. Jared's got his hand up. Jared, go for it. There you are.
Hey, Jared.
Yeah, actually, I'll start us off. I would just be interested to hear about what you were saying about healthcare, how cybersecurity has been affected due to COVID, maybe more specifically, or just in general, how.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. You're good. That's pretty much what I was asking.
What's going on right now is fascinating, right? Because basically what we have happening, and this started with Universal Health Systems about 2 weeks ago. So Universal Health Systems has almost 400 hospitals. And, the thing you've got to, sorry, am I waiting for you, Bill? Okay. I just want to make sure you're good. You good? Okay. So I got to remember, I used to be trained in this of, watch your interpreter and know where to slow up and slow down. So I gotta step back and get used to this, but it's always an honor to be interpreted, especially when these guys do such a great job with it. So, the thing that's happened at Universal Health Systems was you saw an attacker, in this case, UNC 1878. Well, actually, I don't know if UNC 1878 was on UHS, but they're certainly in what's going on now. And the point is, you're going after a large US health system in the middle of a pandemic, knowing that you're going to have a kinetic impact that's going to affect people's lives. A week earlier in Dusseldorf, we saw the first confirmed death due to a ransomware incident where a woman had to be diverted to another hospital and died in the ambulance due to the extended length of that diversion. So, we now know that this can literally lead to death, let alone what happens in a hospital when they're locked up with ransomware is hospitals depend on electronic healthcare records. I mean, nurses and physicians aren't trained to paper chart anymore. So when you lock up a hospital with ransomware, it's down cold, and it becomes risky to treat patients because you don't know their medications, their history, sometimes even, you know, kind of what their background is. So they start diverting patients, they cancel cancer treatments, they put off elective surgeries, and this can have a really devastating effect. Well, it's one thing, not that this is good, but it's one thing when you take down one hospital, you ask for $1 million in ransom, and probably about a 90% chance you're going to get paid. That's bad, but that's also entrepreneurial if you're looking at it from the bad guy's perspective. Now, when we cross over the Rubicon here and we're going after 400 hospitals in one fell swoop, now you're into the realm of terrorism or warfare of some sort. And this is very unusual because the group behind this, which is also the actor behind TrickBot, doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. I mean, this is a entrepreneurial actor. It doesn't do them any good to draw the attention of every intelligence agency, law enforcement agency, and security company on the planet. And right now, today, we know there's 12 hospitals down, and I mean down hard. And the attack is still ongoing. A lot of those indicators of compromise are out there. So it's being blocked at the network layer, at the carrier layer, by security tools. But, you know, the attempted attacks are still continuing, and we're going to have to see where this goes. But the biggest thing that's so different about it from what we've ever seen historically on US soil is this change in adversarial intent. I mean, you know, up to this point, it was really mostly about stealing data, extorting people with a little bit of ransomware. You really haven't seen a true kinetic impact on US soil. I mean, yeah, we've seen people try to play around with dams and energy companies, but most of that's nation state activity, just poking at the perimeter to see what they can do, not actually executing something broad scale. This is going to impact people's lives, and this is happening right now. Other questions?
Everybody's quiet again.
Very quiet crowd.
Right. Yeah, they're so good before, right? All the questions are all lining up.
Well, that was because it was Chris. He's got the big beard going and everything. I mean, you know, you got to ask some questions.
He definitely brought, brought some character to it, and there were some really good.
Let me put it this way. Let me ask you guys a question. What do you think has been, when we look at the pandemic, right? And we look at, one of the fascinating things about a pandemic is that it requires governments, private sector, all to work together in a coordinated response. And, you know, in a lot of ways, you could argue that, you know, politics, well, I guess politics included, maybe we didn't get that quite right. Maybe we're still struggling through that. But now let's think about a large scale cybersecurity event. Don't you need the same things to happen? Don't you need government and private sector and, you know, governments around the world to actually work together to solve a problem? I mean, even if you look at what's happening right now in healthcare, in order to really solve that, you've got actors in, you know, Ukraine, Moldova, and Russia. You've got private sector companies that have information. The FBI has information. Cyber Command's been in there playing around trying to take down this botnet, although also with Microsoft. Would there be a different outcome to what's happening right now in healthcare if we were all working together? What do you guys think? Rick, you need to put this on the next quiz so they actually answer the question.
Yeah, no kidding, right?
Well, I mean,
where does it? Well, I was going to say, where does it rank, right? And we know healthcare is important, but where does it rank in terms of impact? Does that make a difference?
Well, it certainly makes a difference if you're in an ambulance on the way to the hospital.
Right.
And, you know, imagine, so take Rochester as an example, right? Okay. And you know, nobody's attacking Rochester hospitals that I know of right now. So let me add that caveat. But let's just use it as an example because it's local and we can all kind of get it, right? If someone goes out and ransoms Highland Hospital, grand scheme of things, big deal. Right now, yes, it's a big deal if you're a patient there. It's a big deal if you're a physician there. but 2 miles down the street is Strong Memorial, and you can divert patients, you can work your way through the process of recovering. And whether you pay the guys or not, if you've got to spend 2 weeks recovering from that incident, you can probably get through it. But here's the thing. Highland is also part of the Strong system now. So let's say they get into Strong and they take out both Strong and Highland. And now you've got to divert down to Rochester General on the other side of town. Now you're starting to get in a little bit more of an impact because, okay, first of all, that's not a short trip, but also now you're in an interesting scenario where who's going to handle all that volume, right? I mean, Strong could probably handle the volume of Highland as a small hospital, but could Rochester General handle the volume of Strong and Highland? Probably not. Now let's add COVID patients on top of that. And now let's say, and this is what's more interesting of what they're trying to do now, let's say it's a broad scale system. So in Rochester, you have two primary entities. You have the Rochester General and you have Strong Memorial, and then they've all got all their affiliates and everything else. If you take out both of them, where are you going to go? Syracuse?
Right,
Buffalo?
right. What's the hot
that's where
snake,
this
right?
gets into a real kinetic effect that really impacts people's lives. And that's what the adversary is trying to do right now. The question is, will they be successful?
And that's a great point, right? I mean, there is no hot swappable hospital, if you will.
No, and eventually get to the point of volume, right?
Yep,
and,
yep.
Especially with COVID patients, and if you start hitting in an area where they're already out of ICU beds,
right.
And now here's the other question, like, what's the adversarial intent here? Like, if you're the entrepreneur, which is how these guys typically work, this makes no sense, right? I mean, it does you no good from a business perspective to bring all this heat on what you're doing. So then you have to scratch your head and say, well, who's doing this? What are they trying to do? Are they trying to prove something? Is this retaliatory after the attempted takedown by Microsoft and US Cyber Command? Or is this political? Or is it terrorism? Or what is it? And that's the part that has the entire industry scratching their heads, is why the change in adversarial intent? And what are the implications of it?
So what are we considering at this point? I mean, what are some of the thoughts to that process besides the Microsoft Cyber Command?
Well, there's one, this could be retaliatory, right? And there's absolutely no evidence to that. But, let's look at this, right? If you're involved in a takedown, and many of you that as you progress into your career, you may have the opportunity, whether you go into the government or you go to the private sector, to be involved in one of these. Generally speaking, the rule of thumb, if you're involved in a takedown of a criminal actor, that's the swim lane of governments and law enforcement. Right. If you have the honor of being involved or providing information along the way, the first rule is you keep your mouth shut, right? Because for two reasons. One, you don't want retaliation, especially if it's coming at you and your family and everything else. And two, however you pulled it off, you want to be able to try to do that again. And the minute you talk about it, then you start giving away to the adversary your techniques, your tools, your procedures of doing it. So the fact that this attempted takedown by Microsoft got stuck into the Microsoft PR machine doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, who knows? Could that have been that the information leaked and reporters picked up on it? Was it ego? Good chance of it. Or something else. But either way, you don't poke a bear unless the bear is dead. And in this case, the bear clearly was not dead. And there's a side impact to it. And this is the part nobody talks about, which is they shut off all the infrastructure they knew about. Well, what else could be the problem in that? You shut off all the infrastructure the whole cybersecurity community knew about. So now nobody has telemetry on these guys anymore, where everybody was watching what they were doing because we knew the infrastructure that was in use. Now with that infrastructure gone, nobody can track these guys. And, these are the interesting repercussions that come in. But here's the thing I want you to think about from an educational perspective. Your career in cybersecurity isn't just about the technical side of this. I'm just, in one attack, we've just hit on the last, 2 minutes. You've got the legal side of this. You've got the business side of the attackers and their intent and motivation. You've got the press and the communications of what do you do. You've got the interface between government and law enforcement. You've got politics in this. All of this stuff weighs into the soup. And let's not forget that we've got an election tomorrow. does that have any potential impact in this? And I'm actually proud of the cybersecurity community, because a lot of people are asking the question, is this some way related to the election? Is this disruptive? And everybody's done an awesome job of squishing that down and saying, no, there's no evidence to that fact, to try to keep our election pure and not let this get spun up in some PR cycle when there's no evidence to that effect.
And take the eye off the ball as well, right? So I'm going to jump ahead. We've actually got some questions in here, but I want to jump down to the one that was just entered. So because it relates specifically to private hospitals and the Canadian model of hospitals. And I wondered if you had some thoughts on Ian's question. And if you're a hockey fan,
enough, Ian, there is actually a Canadian hospital locked up with ransomware right now as well. That we're all trying to figure out how they got impacted. I think they might have tentacles to the Vermont system that was impacted. You know, but yes and no. So at the end of the day, this really isn't so much about how a hospital is funded and operated. It's about their security provisions. And let's wind back to NotPetya. And boy, do I remember that day. And if you recall, one of the initial attack vectors was the, actually, was it NotPetya or was it WannaCry? I can't remember now. It was one of the two of them. But anyway, one of the initial victims of that was the, what is it? It's not the Royal Health Service, but the health service in the UK. I can't remember what it's called, right? But they had a flat network. And what happens with flat networks during ransomware? They all go down like a bunch of dominoes, right? So, you know, the challenge I think you'd find in Canada or anybody that uses more of a provincial model is they oftentimes haven't segmented their network. And I'll tell you, you know, RIT doesn't have a medical school, but a lot of colleges do. And, you know, my company, we go in and we do a lot of the security evaluations and assessments. More often than not, when I walk in, I find completely flat networks, meaning the dorm room literally is on the same network as the surgical suite. And that's freaking scary. And, you know, you get into these kind of scenarios of basic hygiene. And that's one of the things that healthcare is suffering from right now, is the need to put in basic hygiene. And I don't think that matters if you're a Canadian system, a UK system, an American system. We have to realize that the data that's in healthcare is actually more valuable than the data in a bank.
Interesting. All good. This is what we're doing this for. Thank you. Jared, do you have another question, or did you want to run from the list of the chat?
Actually, yeah, I had a question
kind
of on topic with what we were just discussing. I remember in one of your videos, you had mentioned that in a way to deter cyber criminals, we're supposed to figure out ways to change the economics of it. And given that there has appeared to be a lot of new and upcoming ransomware attacks that are getting more sophisticated, how has that developed over the years, and has that really been an effective way to deter cyber criminals?
Awesome question, Jared. You know, at the end of the day, I'm a big believer, and I've even got a TED talk out on this subject, that the only way you're going to fix this is to change the economics, right? And let's look at ransomware as an example, right? 5-10 years ago, most ransomware incidents were like $500. And, you know, maybe if it was a company of size, you'd see 10,000. And I'll tell you what, my recommendation, along with the rest of the industry, when you'd walk into one of these incidents and you're talking with the CEO, I'm like, just pay it. It's maybe they unlock it, maybe they don't, but why are you going to take that as an option off the table if it's $10,000? Well, then the ransoms became $100,000. And, you know, if it was a decent sized company, I'd kind of still walk in and go, yeah, just pay it. And you got insurance, right? Yeah, just pay it. And we'll figure out what to do. I don't like restoring from after a ransomware incident. I'd rather restore from backup, because then I know the data is still integral, but let's not take options off the table. Well, then ransoms got into the millions, and I started going, well, that's a lot of money. Maybe that's not such a good idea. And what are they doing with that money, right? Because now we're well beyond they're buying a Porsche to drive around, you know, in Moscow. Now we're into, what else is this fueling? And then you also started, you know, when you started to see North Korea starting to use ransomware as a way to fund themselves and get around sanctions, then you really start to pause for a second, go, wait a second. maybe paying this ransom isn't such a smart idea. And I think we're now in the realm where, these ransom payments are routinely in the millions. Some of the initial asks on the hospitals that are locked up right now were north of 100 Bitcoin. I mean, it is not cheap. And, part of the reason why healthcare is getting attacked is because healthcare has a history of paying. And people went out and they bought cyber insurance from Beasley or whomever else. And, they dial the number and and they figure out how to pay them and they negotiate and they move on. And, that's really not a good excuse for not investing in cybersecurity. But now you run the risk of not only supporting these terrorist organizations, and some of them are indeed terrorists, or, authoritarian states, or you're fueling someone to attack the next person. So the only way you're going to stop this is to stop paying. And that's easier said than done, because it's going to take some level of government action to get there. But I think that's really where we are today, is we really need to consider as a society, maybe it's time to outlaw payments. And the US Treasury Department 3 weeks ago made a pretty bold attempt to do this. So Treasury's been largely unheard of in this, but Treasury is one of those US government agencies that has unbelievable powers. They're just not used very much. It's kind of like it's like the incredibly burly person walking out of the gym that, you just didn't realize has the strength they have. So the Treasury Department 3 weeks ago reminded the world what their strengths are. And the first shot across the bow was to companies paying ransoms. And they said, hey, if you're paying a ransom to a US sanctioned entity, you personally could face criminal or civil penalties. So that pretty much puts every CEO on notice of, you better think twice, and you better know who you're writing a check to. Because the way it works with sanctions isn't, you can't play the I didn't know who I was paying game. That doesn't work. So that was the first shot across the bow. And that, I think, was directly related to the attack at Universal Health Systems, as well as the attack at Garmin, where, at Garmin, they knew they were paying a sanctioned entity and somebody did it anyway. I don't know how that all went down, but it still happened. The second shot across the bow was the even bigger one, in my opinion, which was reminding US cybersecurity companies and the insurance industry that if you're in the business of moving money or helping to move money to potentially sanctioned entities, or just in the business of moving money internationally, you are subject to US Treasury regulations. So there's a whole groundswell of companies, mostly 10, 15 person shops that have stood up over the years to help people go through the process of paying a ransom. And they get the Bitcoin and they take the money and they move it. Well, when you tell these small companies that they now need to register with the US Treasury Department, that's a whole other level of dialogue than what they're used to. So the long and short of it is, the days of paying these big ransoms could be numbered if the US government decides to use their power to sanction more and more of these entities. Because here's the thing most people don't realize about the Treasury Department. They don't just sanction companies or entire countries. They can sanction individuals. So all they have to do is say, hey, look, we're putting out a sanction on Unc 1878. That's the end of it. You pay them, you're going to be in some serious trouble. And, the way these things usually work with government is the first shot is a warning shot. The next person that does it's probably going to see the inside of a jail cell. Yep. And that could really change things. But, long story short, from my perspective, I don't necessarily think it requires the hard fist, but I think as a society, we've got to kind of realize that paying these ransoms moving forward is probably a really bad idea.
I mean, it's similar to paying for hostages, right?
It's directly similar. And look, here's the thing. Before, ransomware was kind of a victimless crime, like you stole somebody's money, very Robin Hood-esque. Now people are dying because of it. Kind of changes the dynamics a bit.
I'm going to jump a little bit here. I've got some of the questions up here, and one is kind of from your history, and it's because some of us are immersed actually in what's going on over at RIT's Global Cybersecurity Institute. So I'm going to put up a couple pictures here, and behind me, And maybe you can tell us what was your favorite part of working on the this I'm sorry, the cyber talk, if you will, or the bus on wheels, or just the actual range itself.
Well, the basic idea here was, and you have to understand the impetus for this, so I built up a very large scale incident response team at IBM. And IBM wasn't really in the IR business in any real shape or form, but we were one of the largest security companies out there. So we realized that we needed to get in the IR business. I was able to get almost 200 million in funding to go address this, which is a ridiculous amount of money, but we needed this capability. And in a hurry, we stood up, we basically went out and hired anybody that was any good, stood up a large scale team, and really started going after this. And, you go in on these large scale breaches and you start getting really frustrated, not because of what the bad guys have done, but because the lackluster response from executives, I swear, causes more damage than the breach. And you see people their inability to make a decision, their inability to process through the criticality of what's going on. And all of a sudden you start to realize there has to be a better way. So, I wanted to try to make a step into education to figure out, how do we train executives in the C-suite, as well as security teams, to operate better. And I'd heard about this concept of a cyber range being used in the military. It was being kicked around by some generals, and they were thinking more about, how do we build this for offensive training? And once I got the idea, I was kind of scratching my head. I'm like, we could do this. And so I got some funding and lied to everybody about what I was doing and told them I was building another SOC. And I just didn't tell them it was going to be a fake SOC. And, I remember at one point my boss asked me, because it was a rather healthy budget item. My boss is like, "What the hell is this, Caleb?" I said, "Oh, it's another SOC." He said, "But we already have a SOC. Why do we need another one?" I said, "Oh, don't worry, it's a fake one." And the good news is the relationship I had with my boss at the time, he kind of always knew I always had some pet projects, and he kind of like, "Yeah, okay, whatever." And then when he finally saw it, you never know if these things are going to work or not. But it really, what we found was, a lot of this comes down to gaming theory. The minute you immerse someone in a situation that is so real that you forget it's an exercise, all of the stuff comes forward, right? And we were hoping to put people through something realistic, but I'll tell you what we never anticipated. And it took a while to figure out what was going on. But what we didn't anticipate was the fight or flight, hormones that race through your system. Now, Rick, you've been down there and you've seen this. I mean, literally 10, 15 minutes into it, you get a cortisol flush that hits your brain and people turn into idiots. And they're literally saying things they would never say to each other. They're using language that they would never use to each other. The mansplaining was out of control. We'd be sitting in the back of the room going, what just happened here? Like, these people were normal 10 minutes ago. And that's when we really realized we were onto something, which was the psychology of what was happening and how it was blocking people's brains of thinking clearly. Because, your amygdala gets hit with that stress of realizing that your company is in a serious crisis. You can't make a straight decision for about 17 minutes. And once we tapped into that, then we got really good at tapping into that. And we figured out, the amazing thing though is, you get somebody's fight or flight mentality to kick in, you can teach them something they'll never forget. Once we tapped into that, then we knew we were on to something. So, after like the first year, I think we had, I can't remember what the numbers were, but we had thousands and thousands of people through this. And then the military started coming, US, foreign. I mean, we were training the NSA, we were training the FBI. It got crazy. And then we really knew we were on something. And interestingly enough, my kind of mastermind behind a lot of this, oddly enough, well, not oddly enough, actually, is a RIT grad. And, she came from the media arts side. And, you put the two of us together and we were really able to grab something with this. So, the cool part is that the next of these kind of ranges or environments is actually getting built at RIT.
It's interesting you tapped into the psychology beyond everything else in the tech side. That was what you went to, and I stress that because right, we're business students typically talking about this stuff as well, and it isn't the blinky lights. And I've said this with Chris too. We forget it's people, process, and technology.
But you got to understand, Rick. I'm an RIT electrical engineer.
I know.
There's no psychology. There's no feelings in my background. Like it's all been wished. We're watching this go down.
Yeah, that's what hit you.
We are literally sitting there going, "What is happening?" Now, here's the other fascinating thing. We would do these exercises, and we're bringing in people with amazing titles, boardroom, boards of companies and things like that. And the other thing that struck us as odd is there's some people that really went through it masterfully. Like it was like another day in the park. They were calm, cool, and collective. And then there were people that were just all over the floor because crisis decision-making is different than regular decision-making. And it took us almost 6 months to figure out what was separating the good from the bad. Any guess as to what it was?
I'm not going to say. I know the answer here.
You've already told
you. Yeah.
Anybody want to guess? It was 2 careers, and it was uncanny how often we could pick this out. It was people with military experience and people that had, fire, EMS, or healthcare experience. Because if you think about it, those are the only career paths left where you regularly work in crisis and you train constantly for your worst day.
Yeah.
So even though this was something new that they had never seen before, they were able to process through very collectively. And there's a concept, I won't go into it today, but interestingly enough, it's one of the things that you guys should be taught, if you haven't, in your security classes, is an OODA loop. And it's a fascinating concept of how fighter pilots think through decision-making in a crisis. And it is the way to think through a crisis, especially if you're facing a cybersecurity incident.
So you'll be happy to know I do actually talk about the OODA loop, but I actually have a preface to it, and it's a Barracuda, right? And it's breathe and relax, and communicate, and then do the OODA loop, because nobody stops and just takes it all in first, right? Before they start to orient themselves. And so there is this piece of it.
What is really going on before you start to act?
Yeah, no, it's just good. So I don't know, there's some others in here. What ways can the Cyber Ops Center be expanded? What could be added to increase the sense of immersion for those in it? And I swear I didn't write this. So, but.
Well, you need to, when you do the female talk, you need to bring Allison Ritter in.
She's already on the list.
She's really? List. Oh, yeah, if you guys have an opportunity to listen to Allison, she's amazing.
Nope, she's on the list.
So, the thing with this is gamification. We turn this into a game. And here's the funny thing. Even 50, 60-year-old adults, they love to play a game. And the thing with engineers and folks in security jobs, if they realize it's a game and, they're going to win the game, or they're going to sure as hell try. And, we realize that that's the best way to get a point across for people to realize what they're doing. But also, you have to actually do it. Like when you do a tabletop and you present someone a scenario, what you do next, it's too sterile. We found that, one of the best tools we had was a phone ringing, because when a phone rings, you can answer it. Someone has to take action. You actually take people through the steps of doing it. So in IBM Cyber Range, if you're going to issue a press release, you issue the press release. You go sit in front of a reporter. If you're going to talk to an investor, you're going to talk to an actual investor. If you've got to brief the CEO, then the CEO is going to walk in the room and you're going to brief them. And it's all about literally making it real. But you have to realize that the career you're going into, you are this generation's emergency responder. When you show up, it is the worst day in the life of that company. And your job is to try to fix it or reduce the damage as much as possible.
I'm thinking of one of the most powerful things you did, and it was probably one of the simplest things. And you came to our the Sklarski Data Analytics Lab one day to a group of my students, cybersecurity students, prior to even talking about the lab, and you walked in and you pulled out your phone rang while you were doing your PowerPoint presentation, and everybody just stopped for a second and like, what the hell is that? And it was your phone, but it was ringing from the PowerPoint, right?
Right.
Nobody knew the difference, and you answered it, and in role, you broke character of presenting, but you entered a new character of, I've got a situation here and I have to take care of it. And everybody was just astounded at that moment, because it was like, where am I? All of a sudden, I was now taken into your world, and you were handling this, this major concept. So when what's next? I mean, even simple little things like that, I think really struck a chord with at least me, and I think a few of the students that day, and how that could be used. And I know I'm spending a little time on the immersive piece of this, and can't wait to talk more with Allison. But I think that was powerful, and I think it's those things that we just don't realize. Am I in the game? Am I out of the game? And where's the in between? And literally, I think we are always in the game. That's kind of the thing I'm getting at, right?
Well, and here's the other thing: you can't make this stuff up. I mean, the craziest scenarios we could come up with, that were like, oh, that'll never happen in real life.
Yeah.
A week later, it would happen. I mean, I didn't think crazy stuff could really happen, of executives making decisions so bad that they'd end up going to jail, and bad guys being in systems for months or years before people realize it. And then along comes Equifax, and you look at the timeline, or better yet, read the case study on Equifax. I mean, it's just unbelievable what went down there. And the funny thing is, if you knew the executives at Equifax, which I had actually met their security team before they had this incident, they aren't any different than anybody else, right? This wasn't a case of a bunch of incompetent individuals. It was a case of bad things happening in the right sequence and people not realizing it, that you end up with what looks like, in the full view of history, some incredibly poor decision making. But if you look at any of the decisions they made in the moment, most teams probably would have made the same call. Right. And that becomes a really good lesson to kind of look at over all this stuff. I mean, you just can't make up how crazy some of these criminal actors are and the things they're trying. And, that becomes the exciting part of this career. But the big thing I would encourage you to do is, you really live by understanding these actors and what they do. One of the disciplines I have, every single morning I listen to the Cyberwire. It's a podcast about, the quick rundown of what's going on in cybersecurity. For me, it's like Game of Thrones, right? I mean, it takes the first season to understand who the heck all these people are. But once you get into it, these people are like your kids. I mean, I know every one of these gangs, what they're up to. And that's why things like what's happening right now in healthcare are so disturbing, because I know these people. I know what their motives are. I know how they operate. And I'm like, this is not normal. So what's going on? And that's a really key part to be up to speed on at all times in this career.
Right, especially because you've tracked the history of them, and now you're looking at what's fueling them, what's changed their mentality, to go after these larger.
Are you on the run? Are you pissed off? Are you changing your tactics? I mean, what's the game here?
All right, so I've got a few more questions in here. What's the biggest recommendation you have for someone interested in entering the field? And you mentioned one, I think. What are 2 daily habits, was the question, that have helped you flourish and remain disciplined in the field?
So I think a couple of things. So, I think my biggest recommendation for someone entering the field is realize, this is a field with 500,000 open jobs right now in the US.
Yep.
So you're absolutely entering a field where the job opportunities are abound, but what you really, like anything, if you're going to do it, go into it to be the very best at what you're going to do. And once you figure out, you don't need to figure this out in school, but once you figure out what is it you want to do? Do you want to be a malware researcher? Do you want to be an executive? Do you want to be a product manager? Do you want to be a threat hunter? Whatever it is you decide to do, be the damn best at it, right? Because, interestingly enough, anytime you have a market where there's a lot of open jobs, I don't think you necessarily have to worry about being employed, but if you want to separate yourself, you got a lot of competition to really separate yourself at the top. And if you start now, you start early, you can do some amazing things. I think the other thing I would throw in there in terms of recommendations is and I wish somebody had grilled this into my head when I was at RIT, don't just swim in the technical lane. Like, you don't realize how much you need perspective because you are up against a human adversary. It is not a biologic. It is not a machine. It is not following a formula. So you need to surround yourself with people that think differently than you do to be able to really be good at your job and understand it. So kind of my two big habits, I talked about one, which is kind of having a constant pulse of this. But the other thing, realize I'm a CEO of a company, right? Of a public company for that matter. It's really easy to become separated from the tech for me. I always pick a pet project or two that I do myself. It drives my staff nuts, doesn't matter. I'm probably not as good at it as other people, doesn't matter. I've just always found as I've moved up in the executive ranks, one of the smartest things I can do is pick something small, pick some unique piece of what we're doing, and actually be the technical expert on it, even though I'm still the boss. And that has really held true for me through my career because it forces me to make sure I always know what I'm talking about, and I'm still tied back with the people that are actually producing the goods that matter.
Can you tell us what one of those has been in the past? Just
Well, the
curious.
Cyber Range was a good example of one of those, right?
Okay, that was the pet project. Yep.
Yeah, I mean that was definitely a big Caleb pet project. We built another one of my favorite pet projects was, I wasn't leading this one, but I was really helping to drive it, was building out an intelligence corpus, right? So using a graph database to track intelligence versus using a relational database, because when the problem with tracking intelligence data is it's not formatted, right? You have, on one actor, you might know who they are, you might know their common tools and techniques. Another actor, you might only have a slice of information, but over time it starts to build. So how do you do that? And working with a couple of engineers to really drive this concept of a graph database to track intelligence, one of the coolest projects I've ever worked on. One that I knew nothing about, but was, as they would make progress, I would try to stay one step ahead of them by, getting the funding and the resources and the capabilities they needed to keep on moving.
Somebody asked the Cyberwire being the actual name of the podcast. Is that correct?
Yeah, the Cyberwire. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's thecyberwire.com, and you can find it on all your favorite podcasting sites, and you'll hear me on there every couple of weeks blabbering about something or other.
Well, let's see. Starting a career in cybersecurity, what are some things I should know? And I might have that. Okay, so go with that one. Or I'm trying to read.
If you're going to have a career in cybersecurity and you're purporting to be an expert in mobile security, don't leave your phone on the table at breakfast with Rick Mieslan. Very bad idea. Made that mistake once.
Did you do that? I don't remember.
Yes, I did. You probably brought it back, and I'm like,
is this yours?
Is this yours? Did you just leave this on a table with me?
Let's see. Explain the process you went through in order to get your startups to be paired with such large companies.
The interesting thing is, especially now, there's no shortage of money if you've got a good idea. The challenge is, are you willing to make the sacrifices you need to make early on to get it going? And I'll tell you, that's a really easy proposition and really easy math when you're, 27, 28 years old. Yep. That's a whole different calculus, when you got two kids in school and, you're 40 or 50 something, right? So, if you've had a desire to be entrepreneurial, do it early. And, when you get older, you get to do the same thing. You just got to get to do it with other people's money, which means you just need to be good at it.
I'm going back to something you said, not just focus on the technical. And I'm wondering if there's not a thought to, I know I've seen these at other universities, the brown bag lunch, where you get all the different people that are, we can't do it now, obviously, but from the different walks of life or the different groups on the campus. And I don't know that we really have something like that other than our own, school of individualized study where you can pick and choose from all the different, cafeteria plan for a degree. But I'm wondering if there's not some thoughts you have for, how do I do that? How do I reach out to, what are
Well,
those
think
things
of
I
it
should
this
like?
way, right?
Is it psychology? Do I go after those, or humanities, or
Well,
exercise science, right?
figure out where there are people that think differently than you think, right? Interesting enough, I mean, at RIT, you've got just an awesome
Plethora.
access
Yeah.
to some really different kinds of people, and try to build a team with different groups of people to look at a problem, right? Because think of it this way. If I presented you a situation on an actor, I can guarantee you, the folks in the criminal justice degree are going to look at that actor and that issue in a totally different way than someone with an art degree, in a totally different way than someone with a psychology degree, in a totally different way than you're going to look at as an engineer, right? So, but each of those layers adds perspective that you need. And one of the toughest things to get used to is to get past your own ego, that maybe somebody else has an idea that you haven't thought of, or has a different way to look at a problem that you don't realize. Because you have to ground yourself in remembering that if you're choosing a career in cybersecurity, there is no formula. It's a human. And that is the toughest thing to get your head around. But at least for my brain, once you get your head around that, that's what makes it cool, because it's constantly changing.
It is the 7-layer dip, if you will.
Yes.
Right? It all works together.
7-layer dip. I'm going to use that. That's good.
All right. I don't see any other questions out here, guys. I mean, we had, unless I've missed one, I apologize. Anybody have anything else while I'm seeking through these? Nobody's asking anything. What do we got for time still here? I don't want to, it's 8 o'clock. I don't want to be totally disrespectful, but what's your timeline like? Are you good for
Yeah, I'm good for
30 minutes or?
Yeah, I can keep going.
All right.
I mean, it's COVID times. It's not like anybody.
Right.
Yeah, I got to go get a flight at the airport, Rick.
So let me ask you this: plug your video, right? Where is your YouTube video about lately? What have you been doing?
I've actually been doing a lot more podcasting lately. I mean, for whatever reason, and this is the fun. I don't know. COVID's funny because it changes how people want to ingest content, and the funny thing with COVID is it has to be well produced right now. So rather than Caleb trying to edit and cobble together his own content, or me trying to convince my son to do it for me, which is really uphill, I found it's better to use professionals, and especially if they'll do it for nothing. So that's where I've been doing a lot of stuff on the Cyberwire. And what I've really been trying to do lately is get people to think differently about what's happening. And, in particular, getting people to realize there's an awful lot we can learn out of a pandemic, but there's also an awful lot we need to change. So I'll ask you guys an interesting question. So right now, the US government describes 16 areas of critical infrastructure, right? So, communications, agriculture, healthcare, energy, dams, blah, 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 right? Is that really critical infrastructure nowadays? So I don't know about all of you, but in the early days of COVID, critical infrastructure for me is like a Zoom meeting, because it's how I go to work. It's how my kids go to school. It's how I meet my buddies and have a beer. That's kind of critical infrastructure. And guess what? It's pretty easy to hack. Yeah. But also, like, what about Amazon and Walmart? I mean, I don't know about your household or dorm room, but that's where all my supplies are coming from. And if you're going to get 47 rolls of toilet paper, you better have an Amazon account. I think we've just got to really rethink, what do we rely on as a society? Because the internet is the critical infrastructure of all critical infrastructures, yet we don't treat it like one, right? We treat it today kind of like just, open season, do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. And we don't have a lot of control over it if something went bad. So although the current pandemic we're dealing with is biological, we could absolutely be seeing a similar type of pandemic activity if we had a large scale vulnerability crossing the internet, right? I mean, The crazy thing about NotPetya is it had a kill switch. I can't even begin to tell you how busy myself and my teams were that day. I mean, I remember that day like I remember 9/11, just in terms of things dropping and the level of stress. Obviously, not quite the same severity, but it gets cemented in the back of your brain. If that hadn't had a kill switch and had gone on for weeks, I mean, companies everywhere would have been dropping. And we are woefully unprepared as a society to deal with something like that. But we need to get prepared, because at the end of the day, it's coming.
It's interesting you put the internet as, if you will, the underlying concept to all of the other 21.
It is the critical infrastructure to trump all critical infrastructure.
Right. And it's not on the list per se, if you will.
But all right, so now let's get into something a little controversial. Who has control over their internet? Well, China does. I mean, the Great Firewall that controls largely, is there to control what information people see, in a lot of ways there to hamper free speech. It has the side benefit of allowing them to filter anything.
Yep.
Now, I'm not trying to make a political statement to say, hey, we all need a Great Firewall, but that becomes a really helpful tool. If you have a large-scale cybersecurity attack, you can just shut things off. We have absolutely no ability to shut anything off.
Yeah.
And or let alone even coordinate it.
Well, and then flip it, right? Go look at Google Maps and Chinese map roads, right? And try and look at the map, and it doesn't match. And that's interesting, right? Why? Well, Google situations and what have you, but yeah, interesting. No switch, no off switch. There actually is at the White House one switch. It says internet on and off. I don't know if you've seen
it doesn't happen.
Yeah,
trust me, it would have been flipped already. All right, but let's go down that path.
Yeah.
Twitter, critical infrastructure.
There it is. Yeah, right. Is it?
I don't know. I mean, on one hand, I say it's a social media tool and probably not a very good one. On the other hand, if it's how the president of the United States is going to communicate with the world,
right?
Would we rather be in a scenario where we, and it was recently hacked, right? Including a former vice president, 2 presidential candidates.
Sure.
Now think of it this way. Now, not getting into the politics of which way anybody leans, but let's just say not everybody loves Trump's tweets. Would you rather not love it and know it's authentic, or be in a scenario where not only do you question it, but you question if it was actually him? Like that brings us to a whole other level of breakdown and trust. I mean, yeah, we may not all love what he's tweeting out there, but at least we know it's him. Now, if you start to question, well, wait a second, is this really the individual? And you start breaking trusts and systems, this becomes key. And, I think in a lot of ways, we've got to look at some of these social media outlets. If that's how we're going to communicate with large populations, maybe the critical infrastructure.
It's a great point. I mean, it is the wire, if you will, that he chooses to use.
Yeah.
And whether he has an audience for it or not.
Therefore, you better make sure it's authentic.
Right.
And you better make sure you can trust it.
And this goes back to some of the stuff that Chris was talking about in the last hour with deep fake and, what's real. And we're a society of, we don't trust the FBI agent that calls and says, hey, I want you to help out with this crime.
No, do you know why they show up at the door? Because people hang up on them. I mean, talk with any FBI agent, like, oh yeah, we have to swing by. If we call and say we're the bureau, they just hang up.
No, but right, exactly. Jared, do you have a question?
Yeah, I guess I would kind of ask the question that we formally asked Chris before, and that is, where, in your opinion, do you think this is all heading in terms of threat detection and response? What does the future look like from your experiences?
I think the future is a couple of things. First of all, we're rapidly getting to the point where, the old adage was you didn't need to outrun the bear, you just needed to outrun your best friend in a bear attack. No, that's done, because it's a pack of bears. So, we're going to have to realize that strong defense is a requirement for businesses to operate. And that's a tough thing for people to get over, but it can be done. I mean, let's face it, ransomware at the end of the day is basically preventable. So we're going to have to get in front of this. But it also means that if we are, as a as an open free society, we are particularly susceptible to this. And we're susceptible not only in the forms of data exfiltration, but what we're about to get hit with is being susceptible to trust violations. And, these kind of deep fakes and fake news, this is the start of it. But think about where this is going. I don't actually have to attack the bank or attack the hospital. All I have to do is change the data. And if I change the data, that's far more devastating than stealing it, far more devastating than extorting some CEO's email. Because the minute I show I can change the data, then I can't trust any of the data. And free societies ultimately are built on trust. So if I can't trust what's happening, then all the rest of it doesn't matter. And I think the biggest thing all of you are going to be hit with in your career is this whole dialogue about trust. Is this information I'm seeing, is it integral or not? And it's interesting, as we kind of were dealing with everything going on in politics and deep fake and, all the lying that goes on now in politics on both sides. But also, the kind of all the stuff we saw 4 years ago with Russia and Facebook, I've really started to scratch my head to say, well, wait a second. Maybe we need to think about things differently from a security response perspective as well, because it's one thing to respond to a loss of data. And we kind of know what that playbook looks like. It's another thing to respond to a ransomware incident. We know what that playbook looks like. And it's even, we kind of know what the playbook looks like to respond to a destructive attack. But I don't think anybody knows what the playbook is to respond to a trust attack, where someone is breaking trust, whether truthful or worse yet, disinformation. And how are you going to combat that? So, at some point in your career as a security professional, you're going to be put on the line. Your reputation is going to be put on the line to prove that what you represent, either the company you represent, the data you represent, is integral. And how are you going to do that? Because those are a very different set of tools than what most people have today. And that's where I'm spending a lot of time thinking about how do we get in front of that?
Interesting concept too. I mean, you think about like you talked about our news agencies and what is and what isn't. We really have no method, if you will, to authenticate, right? I mean, we all just Google it, right? Is this true? Is this not true? And we look at the ratings and say, oh, well, this one's, even Snopes at this point, we're not sure of, or Wikipedia, or, it's such a fluid state. And that's
let's just make something up. Let's just say some bad guy went into Wegmans and said, oh, Wegmans, Wegmans is very, Wegmans is incredibly organized, right? Yeah. And I'm just using Wegmans because it's in Rochester, right? And let's just say somebody went into Wegmans and said, I can change the temperature on any refrigerator in a Wegmans. And I can make it look like it's, 7 degrees, but it's actually going to be 75 degrees. And I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing all of those refrigerators at Wegmans are internet connected and plugged back and all that stuff, right? They wouldn't even have to do it. All they would have to do is prove they could. Yep. And hell, they wouldn't even really have to prove it. They just have to allege it, get somebody to write a story about it. And the next thing you know, it takes off and nobody's shopping at Wegmans the next day. Right? That's the kind of trust attack that we have to think about. Now imagine you're Wegmans, right? Imagine you're the CISO at Wegmans, right? You've got a couple of things you've got to do there, right? One, how do I figure out if this is true? How do I, go back and look at my telemetry, look at my IP environment and see if someone's actually screwed with my thermostat settings? Second thing, though, is how do I go and combat this fake news, if you will? What's my communications mechanism to get the truth out? How do I get my CEO out, not in a defensive way, but in a credible way to go, this is simply untrue, and know I can stand behind that? Mm-hmm. That's a different set of tools than we're used to responding with, but that's the kind of stuff that's going to be needed in the future.
Right, and it isn't technology again, right? And that's
but it has to be enabled by technology. Right?
And it's
CEO
HR,
has got to be able to turn to the CISO and go, are we okay?
Yeah, are we good?
Do we have a problem?
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. Look up the chat. Nothing else there. Any other questions?
I love this one from Nick. Honestly,
Oh, yeah.
dependent on folks like Amazon, Walmart, and ISPs is one of the scariest things regarded unregulated monopolists in the US. Well, you've got an interesting point there, Nick. And I don't even think it's so much about monopolies in the kind of traditional Standard Oil sense, right? It's about diversification. And this is another thing that we haven't talked about, right? But there are certain suppliers, certain pieces of our infrastructure that if we all lost them tomorrow, we're really up a creek. And it's not just the Amazons and the Walmarts, but it's also like, well, I'll give you another example in healthcare. More and more of healthcare uses Epic as their electronic healthcare records. If Epic goes down, it isn't one hospital is down, it's half of them. And those are we have to relook at our infrastructure, asking a different set of questions, which is what could happen if, and how do I prepare for that? And that's a lot of what all of you have to build, is that inquisitive brain to say, what is the most likely thing a bad guy could do? What is the worst thing they could do? And how do I plan for those two scenarios?
I'm looking at the words Amazon, Walmart, and I'm thinking beyond that, I'm thinking supply chains, right?
Oh, yeah.
Security of our supply chain, right? And we saw this in even early days of COVID, not just the toilet paper, but just masks and sanitizer, right? And part of it is not being, able to produce it fast enough or have the facilities here to produce it.
Well, taking it, like if you want to cause a major supply chain disruption, go mess with the port and say, hey, I can prove that I could reroute a container in the port of Long Beach and prove that you could do it, right? Probably wouldn't be hard to figure out for some advanced adversary. You prove that, you post it, nobody's sending a container through Long Beach. You don't send a container through Long Beach. I don't know what that represents in terms of GDP flowing in the United States, but it is a double-digit percentage, right? That would be almost impossible to work your way around. That port's just so big, as an example. And we have all kinds of these choke points in our country and our economy that we haven't thought about what could happen if.
I remember you mentioning in the maritime industry, and it was the manifest is on a thumb drive.
Yeah, the Baptile file. Yeah, so this is the really scary thing that Rick is talking about, is the manifest as your average container goes, from ship to truck to train to car, you name it, is bouncing around. And what travels with it is this thing called a Baptile file. And it's traditionally transferred on a thumb drive from literally, the captain of the ship puts the thumb drive into their laptop. And that's how they know what the weight is and what's in the container. Kind of scary when you think about what's in the art of the possible.
Amazing. I think there was another part of it too, of updating the firmware and the ballast or the rotational systems of the.
Oh, yeah. This was actually, and these are the crazy things you get into in terms of what's in the art of the possible, right?
That's kind of the next question coming up. So that's what I'm leading to here.
Oh, okay. So, what's the craziest, most interesting attack you've ever seen? All right. So this one isn't started since the start of COVID, but this is one of my favorites. And this actually happened. So I'm having this, this whole meeting on maritime security and, thinking about the cyber threats. And this guy starts telling this story. And on these large cruise ships, they don't have a traditional prop. So there's not a traditional, prop at the rear of the boat. But what they have is something called azipods. And there'll be like 6 or 7 of them on the bottom of the vessel. And they're basically a prop on a turret. So what it allows the boat to do is when they come into port, they can turn these azipods sideways, move the boat sideways, and they don't need a tugboat. Well, you can imagine the underside of a boat is not the same shape. So there's a lot of software involved in telling the azipods when you want to move sideways, how much thrust to give out of each one so the hull doesn't cavitate as you move like in a direction other than forwards. And this vessel's at sea, true story. And all of a sudden, they lose control over their propulsion. It's still moving, and luckily they're like 200 miles out, but they have absolutely no control. And as you can imagine, on the bridge, this is causing some significant anxiety. They get to the point where they can't get control over it, and they're literally sending somebody down the engine room to start pulling fuses. And they figure, all right, we're just going to shut this thing down, and we're going to have to get towed in. And before the guy gets there, they get control back. And now this is even more of a concern because they have no idea how they got it back and no idea how they lost it in the first place. And you can't have that happen while you're coming into port. So needless to say, they call lots of tugboats. They bring themselves into port. They make sure they've got all the safety features they need to get in case they lose control again. And turns out that what they didn't realize is the Azipods have their own backhaul over the internet to the manufacturer. And the manufacturer had a scheduled software update on the Azipods that was scheduled to be when they were in port, but they were late. And as part of the software update, they take them offline, put in the software, and then move them around to make sure that they're working right. Well, that's what was happening when they were 200 miles out. But here's the thing that's scary. Now, this was not a cyber attack, but the captain of the vessel and the vessel owner had no idea these things were connected to the internet, let alone on a moving vessel. So it just gives you an idea of the art of what's possible in this crazy world. I think probably one of the coolest things I've seen was there's a takedown about 2 years ago where, I got to participate in it a bit. And, the FBI was able to kind of get inside this gang, and they were able to actually capture a couple of the individuals, bring them in for questioning. And, from that, they were able to draw out a map of all the interconnections of this gang. And, what we've always talked about, but you couldn't really see until they had done this graphic, is how disconnected these organized crime gangs are, right? Every person had a job. Every person was really good at their job, but they were all subcontractors, right? There's one person that built the dropper, one person that dealt with the victims, one person that managed the money, one person that, cleaned the money, and you got to see this breakdown in this incredible level of detail. And you just kind of look at it, you're like, wow, this is unbelievable. But then on the other hand, this is now cybercrime is now like a $1.2, $1.3 trillion industry. The GDP of let's say Ireland is only like 300 million. 300 billion, right? So you quickly realize that the size of this is massive, and we're only beginning to scratch the surface at slowing it down. What other questions do we have?
Right. I think they're all asleep. Yeah. Not because of you, just because it's a long class. We've been here since 6, You remember those 3-hour labs?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember.
So no, this has been great. This has been awesome. And if there's any other questions, please get them in before we head out. We've got quite a cast of participants here tonight, and that's been cool to see, not just from my class, but from others. I'm going to pick out a name just because I appreciate this. And Jake, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but this is kind of interesting. Jake Tognetti, who is on here, actually his grandmother got me into computing in 8th grade. So full circle for me. Jake, welcome to RIT. Glad you're here tonight. Caleb is a rock star in my world, and I'm glad you're getting a chance to meet him and kind of hear from him. But just kind of a shout out to you for being here, and a shout out to your parents when you get a chance. And I know that's probably weird, but I just had to say it. I appreciate you being here tonight.
Awesome.
Means a lot. Yeah, it is. It's kind of, there it is. He put me toward the talks tonight. Good. His dad saw it. Awesome. Good. Do you have any questions, Jake, or you're just enjoying the ride tonight?
Yes, I actually did go to RIT. My bachelor's is in electrical engineering, and then I went back for a combined master's in business and manufacturing. So I am both a Saunders School grad as well as a Kate Gleason grad.
Easy softball questions for you now. That's good though. So let's see, what else can I tell you? Students in this class have heard a lot of stuff tonight. We did cover a little bit of NIST CSF with Chris earlier.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about some of the upcoming speakers with
who else have you got on the speaker list?
Yeah, so Chris Hadnaghi is next week socialengineer.com. And then
Yep.
after him, Chris Nickerson from Laris Consulting, pen test company, big one.
Yep.
And after that is Chris Moskowitz, who, or Mescovitis, sorry, who is the author of the book we actually used for this class and at one time taught at RIT.
So Hagernathy, you need to get to him to talk to you about his worst moments in the social engineering village at DEF CON.
Okay.
And, you know, if any of you have never been to DEF CON once we get out of COVID, Chris runs the coolest, geekiest sideshow I've ever seen in my life. I don't know how he gets away with it legally, but I am a huge fan. And the thing is, he brings in these folks to go social engineer their way into a company. And, you know, they get in the booth. And of course, you're sizing them up based on, you know, what they look like. So all your
there's a booth too.
What?
I mean, they're explaining there's a booth that you're getting into.
There's literally like there's a soundproof booth that they're in and a whole audience of people while you're listening to them basically social engineer their way into a legit company. And, you know, again, you know, I don't know how he gets past lawyers and everything else, but power to him. They sit there, and of course, you size these people up, and you know all your prejudices come out. And you know, some young, you know, female gets up there with a mousy voice, and you're like, there is no way she's gonna get anywhere. And then the next thing you know, she's like talking to some receptionist as their best friend. And the next thing you know, they're going to get together and they're going to go out for a beer. And she's sending him the CEO's schedule and she's giving him the routing numbers to the bank codes. And it is just mind-boggling to watch. So you definitely want to have some good questions for Chris and have him to tell you guys some stories. But I'm a huge fan of what he does.
And Chris is, he was actually in the communications prior to. He's like asking, you know, do I need to prepare anything? So, I mean, he's a little on their edge, I think, coming into this, which is great. I'm kind of playing, you know, hack the human with him a little bit too. So just kind of having fun with it. I know the students have seen him and several of the videos we've shared where, you know, they're hacking, you know, the Verizon phone number and or the account of the interviewer. And Matt Honan, I think, was in on it as well. But there's a lot of, you know, again, we're trying in this class, especially, is just to show that it's not just cybersecurity as a tech. It is all these other pieces and parts. And then, you know, just to hear the war stories, I think that's part of it too, that you've been able to share with us tonight. That's been really helpful.
Well, the other thing, and this is what I think is really interesting about the panel you've got coming into this, is we all work together, right? I mean, there's an enormous respect in the community for like everyone you have on this list is an expert in a very specific slice and discipline of this whole picture. And it's only when we all come together and talk and share information and work together that, you know, you can really advance this craft.
Yeah. And that was the thing Chris was talking about too. I mean, he was going down the list just like we just did there. And you know, he's like, oh, you're going to love this. Oh, this is great. Right. And, you know, that's kind of why we tried to put all of these different spaces, if you will, out there. And again, this is, you know, the first, like I said, and we'll do more of these as we go. A lot of opportunity with this. Somebody asked me a question. I teach a bunch of classes at RIT, but this one is called Cyber Risk and Resilience, and it's in Saunders College of Business.
Which actually I think is an interesting plug for you, Rick, and what you've been building. One of the things that, you know, I think is really interesting about the way you're approaching all this is you're doing it through the Saunders School, right? Not that there's anything wrong with all of the other schools, but you can bring a thought discipline to what is the business side of cyber and how does that play out? And I think that's just such an important perspective that you're not going to get in the other schools.
Somebody said, follow the money. And literally, I mean, that's what this is, right? So for me, it is. And it's also, you know, I bring the background of, you know, the psychology side of it and, you know, my work in the military and law enforcement and seeing it as not just a technology thing. So, you know, it is a criminal thing. So yeah, this has been fun. Just, you know, building up this small little section, if you will. We are adding soon a course in, and I want to call it competitive intelligence, but I believe it's going to be a little bit more than that, maybe dabble into some of the other intelligence types spaces, whether it's open source or other ways of collecting data, not only just for businesses, right, and your competitors, but also just, to know yourself, what you look like on the outside as a business and what's available, what your attack surface is. And we've been talking with a student that just came out of the intelligence program at Mercyhurst and helping us develop that. She's now in our grad program.
Yep.
So another possibility. All right, so if there are no more questions for you tonight, I sincerely appreciate the time you've given us. And I want to thank our interpreters as well, because they have been super busy translating a lot of this stuff, not just with their hands, but also with their minds, because we've talked a lot of different technical and non-technical things here, and I'm sure that's been stretching. So thanks to Bill and Ellen tonight. Greatly appreciate you guys being there. And I can just imagine the drain and the flow coming out when you stop for your break. So thank you again. Sincerely appreciate that.
Well, see, I think Bill and Ellen actually dressed up for this. Like, they've kind of got the cybersecurity look going. Bill's in the dark shirt, and say Ellen's got the whole dark background. I think you two have got this figured out.
They've got it figured out. That's awesome. Well, Caleb, again, thank you for your time tonight. I hope we asked you some good questions. I know Absolutely. We've all learned a little bit tonight. I'm just still excited to have had this opportunity with you, with Chris tonight, and all of my students to get a chance to, hear state of the state, if you will, or where we are and where we're going. So best of luck to you in your world and your future. And I know, it's still going. And you're busy as can be. And, I know we're all super appreciative. I see the thank yous coming across here.
All right. Well, thank you all as well.
All right. We will see you again. Take care.